My parents always told me that family came first, but they never meant me when they said it. They meant my sister. The moment everything snapped in my mind was when they sat across from me at my grandfather's old oak dining table and told me, with straight faces and warm smiles, that I should be happy for her because she deserved the house, the savings, and every last thing he left behind. My mother squeezed my hand like she expected gratitude. My father nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable, and my sister smirked the way people do when they think they've won something forever. I remember staring at the keys in her hand, the same keys I used to hold as a child when Grandpa would let me lock up the shed, and realizing in one crushing breath that they never intended to leave me anything, not love, not support, not legacy. Just scraps, just silence, just the expectation that I clap while being erased. Let me slow down. That moment didn't happen overnight. It was the final snap in a lifetime of bending until I nearly broke. And it's the moment that made the ending so perfect, because the day they handed her those keys was the same day I walked upstairs into Grandpa's office, opened his old safe, and found the letter that he addressed only to me, the letter that would one day make her scream loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Before I get ahead of myself, let me introduce you properly to my life, because this story didn't begin with inheritance. It began with a childhood shaped by shadows, favoritism, and the kind of emotional imbalance that eats at you slowly. And before I dive into all that, let me introduce you to the place you're in. If you're new to Revenge Castle, this is where we tell emotional stories of betrayal, consequences, and justice, the stories people feel in their chest. And trust me, this one stays with you. So before we go any further, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss these slow burn, satisfying revenge stories that take their time, unfold layer by layer, and deliver endings nobody sees coming. All right, let's go back to where this began. My parents raised 2 daughters, but they acted like they raised a princess and her assistant. The princess was my older sister, Lauren. Even as a child, she walked around with the kind of confidence that comes only from being constantly told the world will rearrange itself for you. My parents fed that belief daily. They told her she was special, gifted, destined for greatness. And the way they said it wasn't encouraging. It was final. It was fact. And as for me, I was the afterthought, the shadow, the child who learned early how to stand still so I wouldn't be in the way. Lauren grew up spoiled, not because she asked to be, but because my parents handed her everything before she could even imagine wanting it. When she wanted dance classes, she got private lessons. When she wanted a car at 16, she got a brand new white SUV with a bow on top. When she wanted to take a gap year, my parents funded a 12-month vacation across half the states. She lived in a bubble with padded walls, surrounded by, yes, of course, anything you want. Every time she snapped her fingers, my parents snapped theirs louder to clear the path for her. I, on the other hand, learned the art of independence out of necessity. I studied hard because no one was coming to save me. I worked 2 part-time jobs because no one was handing me cash. I learned to make my own way because they were too busy parading Lauren's accomplishments to notice mine. Whenever I achieved something, my parents clapped politely, but quickly redirected attention to her latest triumph, real or imagined. If I got an A, Lauren had gotten 2 A's years earlier and set the standard. If I got a raise, Lauren deserved one soon. If I scraped together enough money for a used Honda, Lauren needed help picking out her next luxury upgrade. She was spoiled. She was manipulative. She was arrogant. She was the golden child, capital G, capital C, trademarked by my parents and polished daily. And I learned to live with it. not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of screaming into the void, tired of watching them treat my efforts like background noise, tired of waiting for them to see me, even once. But the truth is, the real fracture didn't come from the favoritism itself. It came from the way they used it to control me. When you're raised in imbalance, you think it's normal. You think the crumbs you get are kindness. You think the silence around your needs is just what families do. I believed that long into my 20s, believed it even when I was paying my own rent, buying my own groceries, and living a life built on self-sufficiency. That changed the year Grandpa died. He was the only one in my family who ever treated me like I mattered. When my parents were too busy doting on Lauren, Grandpa would wave me over to sit beside him on the porch swing. He'd let me help him in the workshop, even when I made mistakes. He'd take me fishing and tell me stories about how every person in life had to choose, be the wolf or be the sheep. He saw me. He valued me. He taught me how to stand tall in rooms where people tried to shrink me. So when he passed, something inside me cracked, not just grief, but fear, because he had been the only buffer between me and my parents' imbalance. And I knew, deep down, that without him, the imbalance would turn into outright erasure. I was right. The moment Grandpa's funeral ended, my parents began talking about responsibilities and traditions and what he would have wanted, but every sentence ended the same way, with Lauren. She should handle the house. She should be the one to take over finances. She should sort through his belongings. She should be trusted with decisions. You would think she was his only grandchild, not the one who visited him least and called only when she needed money. I watched quietly as my parents walked through his house with Lauren, pointing out all the things she would get to decide about. It was like watching someone else inherit my childhood memories, someone who didn't deserve them, someone who didn't even remember half of them. The day they gave her the house keys was the day everything inside me went still. They sat me down at Grandpa's old dining table, the same table where he taught me to play cards, where he wrote his grocery lists, where I once did my homework while he read the newspaper. My parents smiled with pride as they slid the keys across to her. And Lauren, she didn't even pretend to hide her satisfaction. She twirled the keys around her finger like a prize, like a trophy, proving she was the chosen one yet again. My mother said I should be grateful. They were keeping the house in the family. My father said Lauren was better suited to handle property. Lauren smirked and said nothing because smug silence is its own language. They didn't even look at me when they made the decision. But here's the part they didn't know. Grandpa didn't trust them. Grandpa didn't trust Lauren. Grandpa didn't trust anyone but me. So after they handed her the keys and gave themselves their victory, I walked upstairs into his office, opened the old safe where he kept important papers, and found the single envelope he left behind, the one addressed to me and me alone, the one that would change everything, the one that would tear their favoritism apart like tissue paper. But the revenge wasn't in the letter itself. It was in what he left with it, a truth they never expected, a truth they never prepared for, a truth that made Lauren scream with a sound I will never forget. The envelope was thin, yellowed at the edges, and soft from years of being handled. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's handwriting, the same looping cursive he used on every birthday card, every Christmas envelope, every note he left on the fridge, reminding me there were cookies cooling on the counter. Seeing my name written by his hand, now that he was gone, sent a wave through my chest so strong I had to hold on to the corner of his desk to steady myself. I didn't open it right away, not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I knew instantly, instinctively, that whatever was inside would shift the fault lines of my family forever. It felt like holding a live wire in my hands, something powerful, something dangerous, something that would spark the moment it touched oxygen. I sat in his leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly like pipe tobacco and sawdust, even after all these months, and I let myself breathe. This room had always been safe. When my parents were too busy coddling Lauren or criticizing me for not being more like her, Grandpa would bring me up here. He'd show me old tools, photographs, coins he collected, stories he had saved for years. This office was his sanctuary, and for the first time, it became mine. When I finally opened the envelope, the paper inside unfolded like a secret cracking open. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't poetic. It was direct, simple, and heavy. It explained something no one in the family knew. Grandpa had rewritten his will before he died. Not a minor update, not a small revision, a complete restructuring. And the last line was the one that changed everything for me. He left the house to me, the entire house, the land under it, every asset connected to it, every account tied to it, every piece of furniture, every photograph, every memory, every choice, every right. Not Lauren, not my parents, only me. Below the main letter was a second sheet, a notarized copy of the will, stamped, dated, and legally valid, filed, final, undeniable. My breath caught in my chest because in that moment, sitting in his old chair, holding legal proof that contradicted everything my parents had just declared, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt vindicated. Grandpa had seen the truth. He had watched the imbalance. He had watched the favoritism. He had watched them elevate Lauren while stepping over me like I was a rug they kept forgetting to pick up. And he made a choice based on character, not convenience. He left his legacy to the child who stayed with him, the child who visited, the child who listened, the child who didn't ask for anything, the child who didn't take him for granted, the child who he knew, deep down, would protect what mattered to him, me. My hands shook faintly as I traced the embossed seal at the bottom of the page. My parents hadn't even thought to open the safe. They were so convinced the world revolved around Lauren that it never crossed their minds that someone might have dared to think differently. They had already written the ending to the story. They never imagined Grandpa had written a different one. But the letter, the will, that wasn't the part that made Lauren scream. The part that would shatter everything came with the third document tucked behind them, a handwritten statement in Grandpa's unmistakable pen, addressed not just to me, but to them. A message he meant to be found only after his death. A message he trusted me, and only me, to deliver at the right time. It explained why he changed the will, why he didn't trust my parents, why he refused to give Lauren control, and why everything was left to me. He explained their years of favoritism, the financial irresponsibility they excused, the manipulation Lauren used even as a child, the disrespect she showed him as she grew older, the entitlement he watched grow until it consumed her. He wrote plainly that he could no longer allow the family home, the place he built with his bare hands, to fall into the hands of someone who treated others like stepping stones. He stated clearly that he saw me, valued me, respected me, and had faith that I would honor his legacy. He said the one thing I had waited my entire life to hear from someone in my family: you earned this. I sat in that chair for a long time, letting the truth settle. Not just the truth about the inheritance, but the truth about my family. All the years of imbalance suddenly made sense. All the times I swallowed pain to keep the peace. All the holidays where my accomplishments were overshadowed. all the moments where I was treated as an audience member in my own family. This letter was proof that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't dramatic, I wasn't imagining things, I wasn't lesser, I wasn't forgotten, I was the one he chose. When I finally left the office, the air in the hallway felt electric, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. I could hear my parents downstairs, laughing with Lauren as they talked about paint colors, renovations, and the future of the house. They had already planned everything, down to replacing the floors I used to run across barefoot as a child. I didn't join them. I didn't walk downstairs and announce my discovery. I didn't ask for their attention. I simply left the house with the documents tucked safely inside my jacket and drove away, the letters pressing against my heart with every breath. Because revenge is never delivered in anger. It's delivered in truth. And truth takes time. I didn't confront them that night, or the next, or the next. I let them paint. I let them brag. I let Lauren show off the keys to her friends. I let my parents post sentimental photos online. I let them mock me for being too sensitive. I let them flaunt the house like a trophy I had no claim to. I watched quietly as they dug themselves deeper into arrogance and entitlement. And then I called Grandpa's lawyer. He remembered me instantly. He remembered Grandpa fondly. And when I told him I found the documents, his voice softened in a way that felt like the final puzzle piece sliding into place. He told me everything was valid, filed, updated, binding. He told me exactly how to proceed, exactly how to deliver the truth, exactly how to reclaim the home without breaking a single law. And when he told me what would happen once the family meeting took place, I felt something rise in my chest, something like justice, something like peace, something like the beginning of the end. I waited 2 more days, 2 days of watching my parents give Lauren everything that belonged to me, 2 days of hearing her gloat on the phone, 2 days of letting them wrap themselves in false security, and then I called them all together, my parents, my sister, Lauren's fiancé, 2 aunts who happened to be in town, and the lawyer. I planned the meeting in Grandpa's living room, the very room where Lauren had already moved furniture because she believed it was hers. And I brought the letter, the will, the notarized documents, the truth they never imagined existed, the scream that would follow. I still hear it sometimes. When the day of the meeting arrived, I drove to Grandpa's house early, long before anyone else would show up. The sun was still low, casting soft orange light across the lawn he used to mow every Saturday morning. The windows glowed faintly, and for a moment, walking up those steps, I felt like a child again, barefoot, sunburned, happy. But nostalgia has a way of stinging when the present is rotten, and the closer I got to the door, the heavier the truth felt inside me. Lauren had already started moving things. The living room no longer looked like Grandpa's. It looked like a Pinterest board exploded. A new rug, a new lamp, throw pillows that didn't match the house's history, trinkets she probably bought impulsively, believing she had the right to redecorate before the dust on Grandpa's grave had even settled. My chest tightened when I saw his old recliner pushed into a corner like an orphaned memory. She hadn't thrown it out yet, but she had exiled it, and something inside me cooled so sharply I felt it like ice in my bones. I stood in the center of the room, letting the weight of that decision settle into place, because that chair, that simple, worn, brown recliner, was the place Grandpa sat every afternoon when I visited. He read in it, he napped in it, he watched the evening news sitting upright with his hands folded over his stomach. Seeing it shoved into a corner was the final confirmation that Lauren didn't value anything about this house except its ownership, not the memories, not the legacy, not the man behind the walls she was so eager to repaint. I moved the chair back into its original place, not out of sentimentality, but out of symbolism. Then I sat in it, the documents resting on my lap, waiting for everyone to arrive. My parents came first, walking through the door, laughing about brunch reservations they had made for later, completely unbothered, entirely confident in the fantasy they'd built. They barely glanced at me before moving toward the kitchen, talking about paint swatches Lauren had chosen for the walls. Their energy was bright, light, comfortable, people who believed they were in control, people who believed they had already won. Lauren arrived shortly after, flouncing in with her fiancé. She wore a sundress that looked expensive and unnecessary for a simple family meeting, as if she expected applause. She walked with a swagger I had seen my entire life, the walk of someone who had never known consequences. She placed her purse on the dining table as if marking territory, then paused, brows knitting when she noticed Grandpa's recliner back in its rightful position. She made a face, subtle but annoyed, and that was the moment I knew she had no idea what was about to hit her. My aunts arrived, confused about the urgency but compliant because my parents insisted this was important. They sat on the couch, murmuring speculation about whether I was finally getting over my envy, the envy they convinced themselves I had simply because I wanted fairness. They didn't know that envy had nothing to do with this. This was justice wearing quiet shoes. The last to arrive was the lawyer. When he walked in, the energy shifted. Not a lot, just enough. Enough for my parents to straighten their posture. Enough for Lauren to smooth her dress. Enough for confusion to ripple along the room's edges. They assumed he was there to finalize paperwork, confirming what they already believed, that Lauren was inheriting the house. I remained silent while he greeted everyone, his professionalism steady, his face unreadable. He had done this before. He had seen families unravel, and he knew, just like I did, that the truth was about to hit them harder than anything they had ever imagined. He sat across from me, nodded once, and began arranging his briefcase. My parents, still oblivious, offered coffee. My aunts whispered about renovations. Lauren tapped her foot impatiently, as if this meeting was delaying her schedule. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I waited, with the same patience I had learned my entire life, silent, observant, aware. When the lawyer finally opened the file, a stillness fell over the room, the kind that arrives moments before detonation. He spoke calmly, methodically, explaining that before his passing, Grandpa made changes to his estate plan. My mother began nodding smugly. My father glanced at Lauren as though confirming what they had all assumed. But then the lawyer said the words that cracked the room open. The final, legally binding version of your father's will leaves the house and all related assets to his granddaughter. They leaned forward. Lauren smiled, preening. My mother looked at her with pride. My father gave her a reinforcing nod. To his granddaughter, who is seated right there. His hand gestured to me. The air in the room shattered. For a full second, no one breathed. No one blinked. No one moved. Then everything happened at once. My mother's expression dropped so fast, it was like watching a mask fall off. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes snapping toward me with shock that bordered on fear. My aunts gasped simultaneously, hands flying to their mouths. Lauren's smile froze on her face, melting slowly into confusion, then disbelief, then dawning horror. She didn't even try to hide it, because entitlement is loud when it's threatened. Her face twisted as she turned toward the lawyer, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the correction, waiting for him to say he misspoke. But he didn't. He opened the folder and placed the notarized will on the table. Then he placed the letter beside it, the one Grandpa addressed to me, the one explaining why everything was left in my hands, the one outlining years of favoritism they denied, years of behavior they dismissed, years of manipulation they excused. The room pulsed with tension as everyone absorbed the reality, settling like dust in the air. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their confidence peeling away, layer by layer. My father's face grew red, not from anger, but from exposure. My mother stared at the documents with a stunned expression, her hand frozen halfway to her chest, as if she couldn't decide whether to clutch her pearls or her ego. And Lauren, she broke, not physically, emotionally. She inhaled sharply, a sound so raw it sliced through the room, then exhaled with a scream, not a dramatic one, not a wailing one, but a sharp, guttural animal sound, ripped from the center of entitlement destroyed. She stood abruptly, knocking over a small decorative bowl. Her fiancé jumped. My mother sprang to her feet. My father tried to regain control. But even he could see there was nothing to control. The truth had already lit the match. Lauren kept shaking her head, pacing, muttering under her breath, her breathing shallow and frantic. She pointed at the documents as if the words themselves were a personal attack, as if ink on paper had somehow betrayed her. The noise she made didn't sound like grief. It sounded like disbelief colliding with ego. She wasn't crying because she lost the house. She was crying because she lost the certainty that she was the chosen one. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the favorite. She wasn't the winner. She wasn't the center of the universe. I watched her unravel, calm as still water, because this moment wasn't chaos to me. It was clarity. It was justice finally walking into the room. It was the universe exhaling in my direction after a lifetime of whispering against me. The lawyer waited patiently for them to regain control, but they never did, not really. My parents tried to argue. They tried to negotiate. They tried to twist language into something beneficial for Lauren. But with every attempt, the lawyer redirected them to the simple truth. This was his decision. This is the legal document. This is final. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't comfort. I simply existed in the chair they tried to erase. By the time the meeting ended, the room was split into two worlds, the one where they thought they lived and the one they were forced to face. My parents left in stunned silence. My aunts didn't know who to approach. Lauren stormed out with her fiancé trailing behind, her scream lingering like smoke. And I stayed behind, sitting in Grandpa's recliner, feeling the weight of the entire house settle into my chest like an inheritance, not just of property, but of identity. For the first time in my life, I had the power. And they had to live with the truth. But the revenge wasn't complete yet, because there was one more step, one more reveal, one more moment that would force them to face everything they had spent years denying. When the house finally fell silent after everyone left, after the shock, the outrage, the denial, the screams, I sat alone in Grandpa's recliner, feeling the weight of a lifetime finally shift into its rightful place. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because the truth had landed, heavy and permanent. Like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples were spreading. They would keep spreading. And for the first time ever, they were spreading in my direction instead of away from me. I stayed in that chair long after the lawyer left, long after the sun dipped behind the trees outside, long after the house grew dim and quiet. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't move. I let the silence wash over me, cleansing years of hurt I didn't even realize I still carried. It felt like sitting in the aftermath of a storm I had survived without ever raising my voice. This wasn't the loud type of revenge people fantasize about. This was the cold, quiet kind that settles into the bones of the people who cause the damage. The kind they feel every time they remember the moment the world no longer validated their illusions. I knew my parents wouldn't accept the truth right away. People who build their lives on favoritism don't adjust to fairness easily. For them, fairness feels like betrayal, and the golden child's downfall doesn't feel like consequence, it feels like cruelty. But that wasn't my problem. The truth wasn't cruel. The truth was overdue. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from extended family. Some were curious, some were accusatory, some were stunned. Aunts wanted clarification. Cousins asked if it was really true. A few relatives who had always quietly disliked my parents' behavior reached out with tentative support. But most of the messages weren't for me. They were about Lauren. They had heard the scream. They had heard the fallout. They had heard the argument that carried into the driveway. My parents tried to contain the damage, but news like this travels fast in American families who gossip across phone lines and Facebook groups. People wanted to know what exactly caused the explosion at Grandpa's house. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't have to. The truth was already working its way through the cracks in their assumptions. My parents, however, didn't stay silent for long. By noon, my mother started calling, then texting. The tone of her messages shifted from shock to disbelief to anger to a sickly sweetness that was more manipulation than comfort. She sent long paragraphs filled with phrases like misunderstanding, surely this can be fixed, your grandfather didn't mean it that way, and the classic line she had used my entire life, don't ruin the family. It was almost impressive, the way she managed to twist reality to avoid accountability. But it didn't move me. Not this time. Not anymore. Because what she wanted wasn't reconciliation. She wanted restoration of the hierarchy. She wanted the family system to snap back into its toxic shape. She wanted me to shrink again. She wanted Lauren to rise again. She wanted everything to go back to the way it was. But the way it was had been built on my silence. And now they had to live with my voice, even if all my voice did was reveal the truth. My father reached out next. His messages were shorter, colder, more calculated. He asked for a discussion, which was his favorite word when he wanted to manipulate the outcome. He tried guilt first, reminding me of everything the family had done for me, as if occasional hand-me-downs and holiday dinners erased decades of favoritism. When guilt didn't work, he tried bargaining. Maybe I could share the house. Maybe we could work something out. Maybe I could be reasonable. When bargaining failed, he switched to frustration, accusing me of being dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. But his words bounced off the shield my grandfather's letter had built around me. Their entitlement no longer had a place in my life. Lauren didn't message me directly. She posted online. The first post was vague, a black background with a long paragraph about betrayal, family, and people who stab you in the back. Her followers flooded her with sympathy. Then came another post, a picture of the house from outside with a caption about dreams being ripped away. It was almost laughable. She wanted sympathy for losing something that wasn't hers to begin with. She wanted strangers to validate her, to reassure her she was still the princess she had always been. But even online, comments started shifting. People asked what happened. Some questioned her version. A few who knew me commented subtly, hinting the truth wasn't on her side. Still, I didn't respond. The strongest revenge is silence after the truth explodes. 2 days later, my parents demanded another meeting. Not requested, demanded. They said it was urgent, that the family needed to talk like adults, that this situation is tearing everyone apart. I agreed, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because the lawyer said I needed to be present when the house transfer paperwork was formally initiated in front of them. The meeting took place back at Grandpa's house again, a place now thick with tension. I arrived early, once again sitting in the same recliner. My parents arrived together, wearing expressions caught between anger and desperation. Lauren came last, eyes puffy, makeup heavy, clearly exhausted from 2 days of crying and performing her heartbreak for anyone who would listen. They walked in with a sense of controlled chaos, still hoping, still believing they could talk me out of the truth, still thinking I might bend if they pushed hard enough. But the lawyer was already there, and he didn't bend. He explained again, calm, firm, professional, that the will was valid, that nothing had been misinterpreted, that the house belonged entirely to me, that Grandpa had made his wishes clear, that legally, emotionally, and structurally their opinions didn't matter. My mother's face contorted. My father's nostrils flared. Lauren's breathing grew shallow. The lawyer then handed me the final set of documents, a simple folder with my name on it, containing everything I needed to complete the transfer. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the paperwork in my hand. It was the shift happening in theirs. They watched something crack in real time. The golden pedestal they spent decades building collapsing under the weight of reality. Lauren's entitlement didn't protect her. Their favoritism didn't protect them. All the years they spent dismissing, diminishing, minimizing me, none of it protected them from the truth Grandpa had written with his own hand. The room fell silent when the lawyer left. And that's when the final part of my revenge unfolded, not through shouting, not through a speech, but through the one thing they never expected from me. I made a decision that changed the trajectory of everything, not out of anger, not out of spite, out of clarity, because the house wasn't just a house, it was a legacy, a message, a symbol, a truth in brick and wood, and I knew exactly how to use it. They sat there waiting for mercy, for negotiation, for compromise, for softness, for the old version of me. But that version didn't live here anymore. And the decision I was about to make, it would shake them more than the will ever did. When the lawyer stepped out and the door clicked shut behind him, the room shifted into a kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt charged, heavy, thick, like the air before a tornado touches down, when everything stands still, not because it's peaceful, but because it's bracing for impact. My parents sat together on the couch, stiff, wide-eyed, breathing unevenly. Lauren sat beside them, hands curled tightly in her lap, breathing shallow, her mascara smudged from days of crying and performing heartbreak online. They looked like a unit, one built on entitlement, on favoritism, on a lifetime of being told the world owed them something. And I stood alone, but I didn't feel alone. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was standing behind me, not physically, but through the letter in my pocket, through the legacy in this house, through the silence Grandpa left between truth and their expectations. I felt steadier than I had ever felt in their presence. My parents were waiting for me to say something, anything, to break the tension. They were expecting the old version of me to beg for understanding or reassurance or validation. They were waiting for me to bend so they could pretend the ground hadn't shifted beneath their feet. But the thing about being overlooked your entire life is that you learn the power of silence. You learn how to make people fill in the blanks with their own guilt. You learn how to let truth sit long enough that it becomes undeniable. So I let the silence stretch, long enough for my father to start fidgeting, long enough for my mother to clasp and unclasp her hands, long enough for Lauren to look anywhere except at me. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was calm. Because calm hits harder than rage. Calm is what people aren't prepared for. Calm is the sound of someone who has already decided. In that calm, I told them the one thing they never imagined they'd hear. Not from me, not ever. I told them I was keeping the house, fully, completely, without negotiation, without sharing, without compromise. That much was already clear in the will, but they needed to hear it from the daughter they thought would always give up before she won anything. And the moment the words sank in, I watched their faces crack. My mother's eyes widened, her breath catching in her chest like she had been slapped with cold water. My father leaned forward, as if trying to physically push my decision back toward the reality he preferred. Lauren stiffened, her jaw dropping slightly, her disbelief loud even in her silence. She wasn't just shocked, she was offended, as if my right to Grandpa's house was somehow cruelty toward her, as if the world was malfunctioning because it had finally tilted in someone else's direction. I watched it all with the stillness of someone who had rehearsed this in her mind 1,000 times. Not the speech, not the wording, but the emotional clarity, the understanding that nothing I did here was petty, nothing was vindictive, nothing was cruel. It was justice, justice that had waited quietly for decades, justice that had been ignored, dismissed, mocked, justice that finally had the documents to stand on its own feet. But I wasn't done. Because the best revenge is not the thing they expect. It's the thing they never see coming. Every action up to this point had been about reclaiming what was mine. But the final blow, the one that made their entire world collapse, came from the one decision they never saw coming. The decision that took their entitlement and strangled the last breath of power out of it. I told them I was selling the house, not to them, not with them, not for them, to someone who valued it, someone who would preserve what mattered, someone who wasn't part of the family system that had suffocated me since childhood. Their reaction was instant. My mother shook her head violently, her face crumpling in a way that betrayed panic more than heartbreak. My father's eyes widened in outrage, his hands tightening on his knees as if bracing for physical impact. Lauren inhaled sharply, a sound too raw to be controlled, the same guttural disbelief she let out when the will was revealed. That was the moment their masks fell, the moment entitlement collided with reality. Because losing possession was one thing, losing access was another. But losing the illusion of control, losing the ability to maintain their narrative, that was the earthquake that split the ground open between us. I didn't give them time to protest because their words were irrelevant. They had built their lives on the belief that they could bend me, but bending only works on people who haven't learned to stand. And I wasn't that child anymore. I laid out the aftermath with the same calm I used throughout the whole reveal. The house sale was already in motion. The listing was scheduled. The lawyer was overseeing everything. I would keep what was legally mine, the proceeds, the assets, the accounts, but the house itself would go to someone who saw its value, not someone who saw it as a trophy. And that was when Lauren broke in, a way I had never seen. Not the performative crying, not the poor me shaking, not the spoiled frustration she used when she didn't get the exact car she wanted or the attention she expected. This was different. This was the scream that would later make relatives ask, "What on earth happened?" The scream neighbors would mention in passing for months. The scream that came from entitlement, cracking so violently it made a sound. She wasn't screaming just about the house. She was screaming about losing the identity she had been fed since birth. She was screaming because the world wasn't bending to her for the first time. She was screaming because Grandpa's love didn't follow their script. She was screaming because she finally saw the truth. Favoritism can build an ego, but fairness can destroy it in seconds. My parents tried to comfort her, but even they were unraveling, their carefully constructed family hierarchy breaking apart like wet paper. They staggered under the weight of reality. They were no longer in charge of the narrative. They were no longer the gatekeepers of legacy. They were no longer the authors of the family story. They were simply spectators. And watching them experience that realization was not joyful. It was not triumphant. It was not gloating. It was peaceful. Peaceful in the way closing a door on a draft is peaceful. Peaceful in the way letting go of old wounds is peaceful. Peaceful in the way truth, finally spoken, settles the dust. I stood from Grandpa's recliner, the final symbol of the man who saw me when no one else did, and walked out of the house without looking back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't hesitate. I didn't waver. I stepped forward into a future I built with my own hands, not one they shaped for me through neglect. The next few months unfolded exactly as they had to. The house sold quickly. Buyers loved the craftsmanship, the land, the history. I chose a young couple who valued the property and promised to maintain the workshop out back. Grandpa would have liked them. He wouldn't have wanted the house turned into a luxury Instagram backdrop or a monument to Lauren's ego. My parents tried more times to negotiate, manipulate, interfere, but every attempt slid off the armor I had built through years of being overlooked. They even tried to involve extended family, shame me publicly, paint me as the ungrateful daughter. But truth is a quiet, persistent thing. It doesn't need defense. It just exists, and people eventually see it. Lauren spiraled publicly for weeks, but eventually, even her audience stopped listening. And me? I didn't just move on, I moved up. The inheritance money helped me start a new life, a stronger one, a life rooted in independence, not survival, a life built on my own choices, not scraps from people who favored the wrong child. And every time I think back to that meeting, the letter, the will, the scream, I don't feel pride or vengeance or superiority. I feel peace, because the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It isn't dramatic. The best revenge is simply living outside the shadow they tried to keep you in and leaving them alone with the darkness they created for themselves.